Can we please invite Mr. Don Brien to the stage, please? Three times an Olympian, a national team member for 13 years, on Canada's senior world team for 8 years, and a bronze medalist at the world level. Twice a gold medalist at international events, a national gold medalist in 3 different age groupings in 3 different disciplines, juvenile, junior, and senior. Gold medalist at North American and Pan American championships too. Not much more you can ask of a kayaker. But here he is, Don Brien, now a Sydney orthopedic surgeon, is that guy. He's a Dartmouth lad who discovered paddling at age 15 as an admirer of his older brother Alvin, who was having success locally. Alvin recognized the potential in his younger sibling and started to challenge and mentor him in kayaking. They talked together about world championships, and their commitment grew. That summer, Don qualified for junior nationals, but his kayak tipped near the finish of his race, and he was in tears and ashamed. He started doubting himself, but he and Alvin watched the 1976 Olympics on television, and Don's commitment was renewed. By 1977, he was a national champion, won gold at Canada Games, and was North American K1 champion. In the fall of 1977, he was named to the national men's team, where he would be for the next dozen years. He switched to Waverley's Chima Club from Banook in Dartmouth to train with other super serious paddlers and coach Frank Garner. Scott Logan, a longtime teammate and successful paddler, was one of those working out at Chima.
He had this intensity. Every time his blade would catch the water, you'd feel it was almost like the boat would jump, because there was this focused force on the paddle. But even more interesting was the fact that he could sustain that the whole race. And a lot of athletes who are big and strong would be very strong early in a race. But Donnie was so consistent.
And Scott goes on to describe paddling with Don in a K2 boat at Nationals at an event in Ontario.
Racing senior K2, and we were winning the race by open water, and it was a new course, and the buoys were hard to tell. And of course, as people have watched the Olympic broadcast, it's very important to shoot your bow when you cross the line, and you throw your body back and you get that extra kick. And Donnie was in the bow and I was in the front. And we got to the line, and Donnie shoots the bow, and he's leaning way back on me in dramatic fashion and exhausted and all that sort of thing. But I realized that, Donnie, we have another set of buoys to go. So we quickly rallied to get back in stroke. By that time, Jean Fournel and Colin Shaw had passed us, and they won the gold, and we won the silver. But it was a great race, and it was just one of those things that he and I always joke about, and certainly lots of people joke he and I about in the canoeing fraternity.
When he was asked how early he could recognize that Don was something special in a kayak, here is what Scott Logan had to say.
What intensity, and it's sort of this term that's thrown out there all the time in athletics, but in Donnie's case, his intensity was much like Adam Van Couverden's, the great kayaker today, who's an Olympic champion. And whether it was every repetition in the weight room, which Donnie didn't necessarily love weights, but he still brought that intensity to the weight room. But every stroke on the water, he was consistent in that intensity. And he always trained over and over with that effort that was above and beyond most of his contemporaries. And that's what sets people apart, athletes in general, is their ability to train hard with that intensity. Some people can kind of raise that intensity during a race, but he trained with great intensity, and that's what took him to great heights as a competitor.
Frank Garner, too, recognized potential in the young kayaker. He worked with Don on goals and planning. By 1981, Don moved to British Columbia to train year-round with the national team and its high-performance paddlers. Now, what did Frank Garner see in this young paddler?
He was a natural athlete, but he had some other qualities. I mean, he was, he had some determination. He was a good athlete, and I just thought that could transfer into a good canoeer.
In 1980, Don and Alvin took a year off to train full-time, seeing that summer's Olympic Games in Moscow on the horizon, the event of which they dreamed when they watched the 1976 Games on TV. Both were selected to Canada's Olympic team, but fate and politics intervened. Canada stood beside other Western nations and boycotted those games. Don continued to work hard, training for the Worlds and the 1984 Olympics. However, In 1982, tragedy struck when Alvin died in a boating accident off of Puerto Rico. Don took that loss as an internal training companion, keeping a mental image of Alvin in his head, a half-boat length ahead, urging his younger brother to catch him by training harder and pushing himself. Alvin, though gone physically, was an emotional motivator. And Frank Garner speaks on Alvin's influence on his brother.
It took him to the other level. Athletes sometimes, they reach plateaus, and some can get through a plateau and push themselves farther, and some can't. For Don and that family, it was just absolute tragedy. And Alvin he would have made the Olympics and done very well in the Olympics in 1984 had he continued. But when he passed, Donnie changed. Donnie took that intensity of his brother, the desire his brother had, and he changed in his practices, in his life, and in a very positive way. I think he just really dedicated himself to that memory of his brother, and he became a different person and a different athlete.
Between 1982 and 1989, Don represented Canada on the world stage. He won 20 Canadian championships in K1, K2, and K4. He was on the Olympic teams in Los Angeles in '84 and Seoul in '88. He medaled in international meets in Paris, Germany, and Moscow. In 1985, Don and his kayaking partner Colin Shaw of BC won a bronze at Worlds in K2 1000, third best in the world.
Physically, he had the wherewithal. He had the motor. We call it the motor, but he had the heart and lung capacity to train. You could almost not give Donnie enough training. He was one of those athletes that had to train very hard to get a lot out of it. Never missed a practice. Total dedication. He had a good mind. He was a tough racer. He was a tough-minded person. And all those things together made him the athlete he was.
Sounds like he was the perfect athlete. However, he had one foible, and that was tardiness.
His name was Donnie Delay, because Donnie would be a little late for practices or a little late for this or that. And the story I remember in Europe, we were in Europe in the van, and he would always be the last one. And this one day we were late, and I was ranting at the front of the bus, "Where's Donnie? Where's Donnie?" And I'd heard this little voice in the back of the bus, "I'm here, Frank." So how stupid did I feel?
He used the discipline from practicing and competing hard to complete his master's in physical education, then earned a scholarship to Dal Med School. He was class president, ran cross-country for Dal, and then went to the University of Calgary for a 4-year residency in orthopedic surgery. Now practicing in Sydney, he is a triathlete, and despite professional and family commitments as the father of 2 boys and husband of Robbie, he paddled in a dragon boat at the World Championships in 2007 in Sydney, Australia, and he won gold. Scott Logan was asked if he's an inspiration to young paddlers.
In the 10 years around the time Donnie paddled was that the canoeing was kind of evolving into a sport that, hey, we can do it nationally and internationally. And, people, as they will hear, Donnie was a bronze medalist at the World Championship. And so when young kids would see that, or even his contemporaries, people that trained against him or paddled against him, you'd say, well, here's a guy, from our community, and we'll take our lead from him, and who knows, maybe others can do it as well. So I think it was certainly inspirational. I think that when we look at the evolution of the sport today, guys like Donnie Brien, cut the path to success and made people very much aware that we're just not competing against Ontario and Quebec and BC athletes anymore. We can be on the world stage, and at that time we were thinking, can we line up with an East German or a Russian or what have you? But clearly Canada's paddlers can, and more specifically Nova Scotian paddlers can, and Donnie was a big part of that.
The Bryans were a paddling family. After older brothers Alvin and Don made the national team, younger brother Colin was not going to let them get a step ahead. Don inspired Colin, 2 years younger and now a Halifax Regional Municipality police officer,